The world's attention is on the border between Russia and Ukraine, the site of the biggest military buildup in Europe since the Cold War. Russia has already annexed Crimea, part of Ukrainian territory, and plunged Donbas in Ukraine's southeast into a separate conflict.
Our allies and partners are ready to impose severe cost and significant harm on Russia and the Russian economy.
If Russia changes borders again by force, this will be a challenge to whole of European security.
But how did Ukraine become a flashpoint between Russia and the West? And why won't Russia leave Ukraine alone?
I don't think that Putin's finished with Ukraine. I don't think he will leave Ukraine unmolested.
Vladimir Putin disputes whether a border between Russia and Ukraine should exist.
Мы не просто близкие соседи. Мы фактически, как я уже много раз говорил, один народ.
He says that Russians and Ukrainians are one people, and has claimed that Ukraine isn't a state, but Ukraine is proud of its independence.
Ми молода країна з тисячолітньою історією.
Russia and Ukraine do have a shared ancestry. A union between Moscow and Kiev in the 17th century formed the base of the Russian Empire. Moscow considers Kiev the cradle of its civilization and its faith. Over the centuries since, the two countries have been intimately connected. Ukraine was a cornerstone of the Soviet Union until the bloc collapsed in 1991. At the time, Ukrainian independence went hand in hand with a new democratic Russia.
Ukraine in many ways set the example for Russia's own independence from the Soviet Union and the idea of Russia as a democratic republic.
But over the years, Moscow came to view Ukraine's independence as a strategic blow, as well as an emotional one. Today, around 13% of Ukrainians are ethnically Russian, and nearly a third speak Russian as a first language. But despite these ties, recent events are turning many Ukrainians against Russia.
It's a country which is responsible for 14,000 dead soldiers and civilians in the war in the east of Ukraine. It's a country that grabbed part of their territory. It's the country that poses constant threat.
75% of Ukrainians born since 1991 now see their future as in the EU, rather than with Russia. But a democratic Ukraine with ties to the West is unacceptable to Russia, mainly due to Ukraine's strategic significance. Ukraine is caught between two spheres of influence, the West and its defensive alliance NATO on one side, and Russia on the other. Vladimir Putin is determined to keep Ukraine in Russia's orbit and keep it out of alliances with others.
Putin doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO because he now sees it as antagonistic towards Russia. A fellow Slavic country, as he says, the same people as us, as a member of NATO, as part of the West, is an affront.
In 1991, NATO's borders in Central Europe only ran as far east as Germany. But as former Soviet bloc countries joined, the NATO alliance in Central Europe now runs in some places right up to the Russian border. Ukraine itself separates Russia from 4 NATO members. As far as Russia is concerned, Ukraine must never join NATO. And for Ukraine's first years of independence, that didn't seem likely. Ukraine was led by governments friendly to Moscow. But by Ukraine's 2004 presidential elections, it was clear Ukrainians had begun to look westwards, and Russia's influence had its limits. With the help of mass protests, Putin-backed candidate Viktor Yanukovych lost to pro-Western Viktor Yushchenko. It became known as the Orange Revolution, and was evidence that Russia was losing control of Ukraine.
Orange Revolution, it mattered because people rose against somebody he backed. It showed that people have agency.
Even when Yanukovych was voted in 5 years later, Putin still couldn't get his own way in Ukraine. Yanukovych continued to look both ways, to Europe and to Russia. When Ukraine was offered an association agreement with the EU, Putin countered with an economic offer of his own. Yanukovych eventually ditched the EU deal in favor of the economic pact with Russia. But many Ukrainians felt sold out, and peaceful protests in Kiev followed. Yanukovych's response was brutal, sparking further demonstrations and the downfall of his government. It was a slap in the face for Putin.
Video has emerged which appears to show President Yanukovych's entourage fleeing from his luxurious mansion outside Kiev.
Putin was furious. He was coming after similar protests in Russia. He had to make an example of Ukraine. He had to show that such events, revolutions, end badly and they end in civil war.
Putin's response was to annex the Ukrainian territory of Crimea.
Crimea, of course, means a lot to Russians. It has enormous symbolic importance. Of all the territories lost by Russia during the disintegration of the Soviet Union, the loss of Crimea was felt most acutely. His popularity rating shot up.
Putin went on to encourage uprisings of pro-Russian separatists in the east of Ukraine, a conflict that's still going on. Putin's strategy has ensured that the EU and NATO keep Ukraine at arm's length, and stirring up conflict on Russia's borders could help with troubles at home. Putin's popularity is falling. Opposition to his regime is increasing, particularly among the young. In 2021, street protests erupted after opposition leader Alexei Navalny was poisoned and then thrown in jail.
Putin needs a new source of legitimacy, and conflict with the West provides, in his eyes, that source of legitimacy.
Putin portrays himself as Russia's defender against a failing West. Western-style democracy can't be allowed to contrast favorably against his rule, least of all in neighboring Ukraine. A successful democracy next door might lead people to demand the same thing at home.
He is trying to protect his regime and compensate for insecurity and weakness internally by external aggression. And that's what rulers who've exploited their people, who've run corrupt and militaristic regimes have done over decades and centuries. Putin is definitely not the first leader to do that, and in that sense he's fallen into that old trap.
For as long as Putin's political woes continue, Russia's border with Ukraine is unlikely to be left in peace.
Thank you for watching, and if you want to read more of our coverage on Russia and Ukraine, please click on the link below and don't forget to subscribe.